Hey there, I'm Chris. Let's follow Jesus along the Talmidim way. Genesis 28, we're calling this Jacob Flees to Haran. Acts 17:11 reminds us to receive the word with all eagerness, but examine the scriptures daily to see whether these things be so. Don't take anyone's word for it, but always do your homework. Check scripture out for yourself. Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us and commands us to immerse ourselves in the words of Torah. Sweeten the words of your Torah in our mouths. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of Torah. Amen. We're continuing the story from last time where Isaac blessed Jacob, and instead of Esau didn't take too kindly to this, plots to kill Jacob. And then Rebekah, his mother, hears about this, goes to Isaac and says, hey, let's make sure he takes a wife from our family instead of from among these Canaanites. So we're going to find out that this chapter starts with Isaac blessing Jacob and sending him off. We're going to find that next that Esau marries an Ishmaelite, further giving example that he is not worthy of the blessing. We're going to have this famous dream of Jacob's ladder. So Jacob begins his journey to Haran, and then he gets about 60 miles away and lays down for the night, and then has this dream of this ladder with angels ascending and descending. After that, God is going to reconfirm the Abrahamic covenant with Jacob, and this is all in a place called Bethel. Jacob will consecrate Bethel, which turns out to be the exact same place that Abraham built an altar earlier in chapter 12. Verse 1, So Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and commanded him, saying to him, You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and from there take to yourself a wife from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, so that you become a multitude of peoples. May he also give you the blessing of Abraham to you and your descendants with you, so that you may possess the land where you live as a stranger, which God gave to Abraham. Then Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Padan Aram to Laban, son of Bethuel the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. One Jewish commentary believes Isaac, either subconsciously or consciously, knew all along that he was blessing Jacob. So he kind of goes along with it in Genesis 27 because he wants to save pretenses of blessing his true firstborn Esau, but he actually knows what he's doing. Now, who knows whether that's true, but that commentary made a good point that this scene presented an opportunity for Isaac to reprimand Jacob for his duplicity, and yet he doesn't do that here. His blessing in Genesis 27 and here is elaborate, and he's very detailed, indicating he may have been old, but he wasn't senile. Now, this does not remove the problem of Jacob's morality and deceit, because as this commentary said, Jacob believes he is deceiving his father, and he acts on this belief, and that, of course, is a sin. So in any case, now the identity issue is out in the open. Isaac can openly and intentionally give Jacob the richest part of the blessing, which is really right here. We focus on chapter 27, but really the promise to Abraham right here is the most significant, continuing on the promise that Isaac himself received and that Abraham received directly from God. The Hebrew word here, where it says, you may become a multitude of peoples, that's the Hebrew word kahal, and that means assembly. And the Greek equivalent word for kahal is ecclesia, which is the word where we get church. And so that's something we want to take a note of. The church originally did not refer to a building, but a body of like-minded people. So it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say that this blessing to Jacob was that he becomes a church of people. And so if we put our little New Testament spin on it, we get that scene of a body, a sense of a body of believers that Jacob will be assembling. Padan Aram is another name for Haran. It's up in the north. It's actually in southern Turkey today. And it's about 450 or 500 miles from where they were in Beersheba. So like Isaac, Jacob's bride has to come from his ancestors. And this is directly contrasted with Esau, who takes his bride from among the Hamites, the line of Canaan, who we saw were cursed back after the flood. From verse 29, we learn that the main event of this chapter takes place in a city called Bethel, and you can see that at the bottom of the screen. Bethel is about 60 miles from Beersheba, and so if you figure 20 miles a day was about what they covered, this would be on the third day quite interesting that he traveled 3 days and then had laid his head down and then had this blessing. So again, something we want to take note of. It's not specifically said it's the third day in the text, but we can logically infer that it might have been the third day. Jacob would have traveled along what later becomes known as the Way of the Patriarchs, and that road extends from Beersheba through Hebron, through Jerusalem, and then all the way up into Samaria, into Shechem, and Bethel lies along this route. Now we have this interlude about Esau. Now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram to take to himself a wife from there, and that when he blessed him, he commanded him, saying, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan." And that Jacob obeyed his father and his mother and had gone to Padan Aram. So Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan displeased his father Isaac, and Esau went to Ishmael and married, besides the wives that he already had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. So further evidence here that Esau continues to be unworthy of Isaac's blessing. He is definitely poking his finger in the eyes of his parents here by taking local wives. And it is interesting that from here the ancestry of the Arab peoples becomes combined from Esau and Ishmael. So the two lines intermix right here. Verse 10, then Jacob departed from Beersheba and went towards Haran. And as we said, it's a 60-mile journey, 3 days, which is interesting. And all these things are going to happen here on day number 3. Verse 10 is also seen as a type of the second exile by the Jewish people by the hands of the Romans. So we know that Esau threatened to kill Jacob, and that forced Jacob to leave. Previously, we mentioned that the Herods were Edomites. They're related to Esau by several hundred years. And so by extension, Edom becomes a synonym for Rome because Herods did the bidding of Rome, basically. Lancaster writes, like Esau hunting down Jacob, the Roman Empire pounced on the Jewish people, forcing them to flee. So Jacob is on his way out of the promised land. And just as Jacob spends over 2 decades in exile, the Jewish people have spent nearly 2 millennia in exile after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD forced all of them to leave, kicked them out, and only really until the last century, the 20th century, did the Jews start to return to the promised land. And he happened upon a particular place. Note there's 3 times that place occurs in this verse. Spent the night there because the sun had set, and he took one of his stones of the place and made it a support for his head, and he lay down in that place. And he had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. So the place in Hebrew, the term is hamakom, and this is the word used in Genesis 24, where Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place. And so the surface meaning is a geographic location, but a deeper meaning of this term hamakom indicates something of spiritual significance. And often one, as we saw in Genesis 24, one where we see an intersection between heaven and earth. And we're going to see that right here with this vision, this dream that Jacob has. We have another detail that really doesn't need to be here, but we have to ask why it's there. So the text could have easily read, he spent the night and he took one of the stones and used it for a pillow. But it says he spent the night because the sun had set. And so let's ask why that is there. And it turns out it's an ominous warning for God's people. And just as we looked at in the last chapter, how Isaac's literal blindness spoke of his spiritual blindness, here we're having physical darkness, and that is going to speak of spiritual darkness. We saw something similar in Genesis 15, where the sun was setting and there was a dreadful darkness. So, and this is right when Abraham had to chase away the birds of the air who came to steal the blessing. John 9:4-5, famous passage. We must carry the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. John loves this use of light versus darkness spiritually as well as physically. And so we see this kind of ominous sign here, the sun setting, it's getting dark. Jacob has to flee the land, and that just reminds us that in our day, the world is a dark place and it is getting darker. But there's something really fascinating when we look at Jacob's return to the land. Notice what it says. Genesis 32:31, now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Penuel. And so I think that's fascinating, where he's leaving and the sun had set, and he returns and then the sun is rising. So who is our light of the world? Jesus is the light of the world. Light will not return to our dark world until the light of the world returns. So we have this dream of the ladder and angels ascending and descending, and we aren't really told what that means. That God appears next, but he doesn't really describe the dream. So we do have a lot of possible interpretations, but I think the most obvious for us as believers is that Jesus actually is the ladder. He says so himself in John 1:51. He said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God descending and ascending on the Son of Man." So though Jesus is a human being, he is also descended from heaven. And he is, in many ways, that bridge between our fallen state down here, speaking metaphorically on earth, and the perfection up in heaven. John 6:38, "I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me." So he is that intermediary, intercessor, that bridge, again, between fallen man and a perfect holy God. John 20, Jesus said to her, "Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father, your Father, my God, and your God." If we want to ascend to God, we must do so upon Messiah. This is Lancaster's writing. The ladder extended down from heaven so that we can have access to the throne. And so Jesus is that intermediator. I can't even say that. Intermediator between God and heaven. And so that's the main view I think that we take. But there are a number of other applications for the ladder. So let's look at those as we move forward. So given the ladder is Jesus, we have a clear Emmanuel application. So Emmanuel is a Hebrew word meaning God with us, or God is with us. So God is completely outside time, and yet he is here with us. He transcends time and comes down to us through Jesus. So although we're on the ground, humble and lowly, although we try to build our own towers of Babel to reach God in our own efforts, the truth is that the only way that we in our sin can reach God is if he comes down to us and dwells among us and tabernacles with us. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. This also speaks of protection. Angels often are associated with protection. Psalm 91, this is often called, "Send your Psalm 91 angels. He will give you his angels orders concerning you to protect you in all your ways." So even though we are in a state of exile, and even though Jacob is about to enter a state of exile outside of the promised land, we are physically separated from our Messiah. God is watching over us, and he will keep us and guard us along the way. And the angels signify that. On the subject of angels, this could also speak of eternity. Luke 16 tells us that angels carried Lazarus up to Abraham's bosom. And in the Olivet Discourse, God will send his angels to gather the elect. So Luke 16, now the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's arms. The rich man also died and was buried. And then in Matthew 24, he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet blast. They will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. So when we die, we don't just, or we aren't just buried in the ground, but if we're believers, the angels will lift us up, and we ourselves will ascend again on Yeshua, the ladder, our gateway up into eternity. The ladder can also speak of prayer. Luke 1:10, the whole multitude of the people were in prayer outside at the hour of the incense offering. So we send our words through Jesus up the ladder, perhaps carried by angels, up to God's high and holy place, just like an incense offering. You light it and the smoke rises up in the air. Often, the ladder can also speak of our faith. We walk by faith, not by sight in 2 Corinthians. We are limited by the world around us. And like Peter, when he tried to walk on water, we see our seas of trouble and we falter. And so when Peter saw that, he took his eyes off Jesus and he started to fail. What did Jesus say to him at that moment? "O ye of little faith." So faith allows us to reach beyond our physical fallen world, to tap in to God's strength through Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And so perhaps the ladder to heaven represents this. How about obedience? Our natural inclination is to rebel and sin. We view obeying commandments as something that's impossible to do, but that is true, which when we're attempting those in our own strength. But when we're focused on him, then we have the strength to make much better choices. We can choose to live for him, or we choose to live for ourselves. And when we're connected to him, we choose to obey his commandments as a gift back to him. And when we do this, we spiritually ascend the ladder beyond what our normal flesh could achieve. So Matthew 28:20, teaching them, make disciples, teaching them to observe all I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the age. So the ladder represents our connection. We are not just living for ourselves in this world. We are living for someone else because we have been claimed by Christ. And finally, we have a sense of the word, or maybe spiritual vision or spiritual revelation. We would not be able to see that Jesus is the Messiah, he is the ladder, unless God came down and revealed that to us. And primarily, he does this through the Bible, although not exclusively. He uses each of us as brothers. He uses things that happen in our lives, but primarily it's through the word that we get spiritual vision. 1 Corinthians 2:14, the natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God. They are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them because they are spiritually discerned. So all of these things are made possible because Yeshua, the ladder, came down from heaven and came and dwelt among us. Then behold, the Lord was standing above the ladder, and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your descendants. Remember, he's headed out of that land, and yet here he gets the promise. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. You will spread out to the west and the east and the north and the south, and in you and your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. There's that promise. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So God here is not portrayed as having used the ladder, but in the Genesis account, he stands above it or perhaps beside it. The Hebrew preposition there is very flexible. And of course, in John's account, we saw that Jesus is the ladder. So God promises to protect and keep Jacob while he's in exile and bring him back to Israel. And this reminds me of the exchange that Jesus is having in the high priestly prayer, where he says, I have not lost one of those you gave me. So Jesus is protecting us and keeping us while we're in exile as well. So bring you back to this land, and we learn later that this is the town of Bethel, or Beit El, the identical location where God met Abraham in Genesis 13, and shortly after the incident where Abraham and Lot separated. So Abraham's faith was rewarded by this vision here. So apparently we can see a sense that Jacob is being obedient to his mother and father by leaving the land, and God's going to answer that. So this appearance is shortly after Jacob's and Esau's separation as well. So we have these themes of promise that were first given to Abraham are essentially repeated to Jacob here. Jeremiah actually paraphrases this exchange in the context of the Babylonian exile in chapter 30. Do not fear, Jacob my servant, declares the Lord. Do not be dismayed, Israel. Remember, Jacob is later going to be renamed Israel. So although it's the nation, it's also referring to Jacob specifically. Behold, I'm going to save you from far away, and your descendants from the land of their captivity. Jacob will return and be at peace without anxiety. No one will make him afraid. For I am with you, declares the Lord, to save you. I will completely destroy the nations where I have scattered you. Only I will not destroy you completely, but I will discipline you fairly, and will by no means leave you unpunished. So God is watching his people. And of course, Jeremiah is writing during the time of the Babylonian exile, where people were going through the same thing of spiritual and physical darkness into a strange land. And God says, I see you, I'm watching you, I'm going to bring you back. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, the Lord is certainly in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. And that's what Beth El means. Beth is house, El is God. This is the gate of heaven. So Jacob got up early in the morning, took the stone that he had placed as a support for his head, set it up as a memorial stone, and poured oil on its top. So he anoints it here. Then he named that place Bethel, but previously the name of the city had been Luz. So the house of God. And so how awesome is this place? We should say that also because we are the house of God. We are the temple. The Holy Spirit resides in us. And so we need to be saying how awesome is this place that God dwells here. This is Jacob's first direct encounter with the Lord. Lancaster draws a really vivid picture here. One can intellectually know that tigers are dangerous, but this is very different from someone who's had the terrifying experience of being stalked by a tiger. So Jacob had heard the stories, but now he's had a face-to-face encounter for himself. And, you can see he's a little bit shaken up here. Abraham had built an altar here previously, and it's here later in chapter 35 that Jacob's name will be changed to Israel, like we mentioned previously. So all of this is going to happen in Bethel. So stones of memory are very common in the Bible and in the larger ancient world. And as we've been talking about throughout the study, establishing altars, establishing monuments like this are a way of conquering the land. We have the same concepts today. We do consecrate spaces. They typically are associated, though, with historical events like maybe Gettysburg or the Alamo here in Texas. But note, we do use religious terms like this is hallowed ground. Hallowed literally means to be made holy. And so pouring oil here is an act of additional consecration. Jacob also made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take, give me food to eat and garments to wear, I return to my father's house in safety, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone, which I have set up as a memorial stone, will be God's house, Bethel. And everything that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. So this sounds very conditional. It says, then the Lord will be my God, as if he does all this, I've got a list of if he doesn't do this, I've got a list of other gods I can pick from. But the phrase could also be read, and the Lord will be my God. Not necessarily as conditional as it might sound in English. It could be that Jacob is already committed to God and just is desiring a deeper relationship. So I think it's okay to read it both ways. Perhaps Jacob anticipated here the difficulty that his uncle Laban would bring him in Haran, and then he maybe is praying for wealth that he will get, or blessings materially, as they looked at it in those days. His prayer is really keep me in the way, and that should be our prayer too, right? Surface meaning is protect me on my travels, but a deeper meaning is let us not forget you. Keep me in the path of righteousness. Keep me in your shelter and your protection. His wealth would actually be in the form of flocks and herds. And so what he's talking about, tithes here, were probably sacrificial offerings and not monetary offerings. And again, as we mentioned, he will indeed return to this very spot many years later in Genesis 35. So again, note the stone, and he refers to the stone as God's house, and that may not be what we think of as God's house, but the stone, in a sense, prefigures the Jewish temple, which will be a place where heaven and earth intersect, a foreshadowing of Jesus where heaven and earth intersect. And so Jacob is saying heaven came down and met me at this place right here in Bethel, the land. And so we have this concept of the heaven and earth intersecting. So note Jacob's requests in red. Keep me on the journey, give me food, give me garments, and let me return to my father's house in safety. Does this maybe remind you of a certain story from Luke's gospel? One commentator sees a definite connection, and so let's look at that on the next slide. Kenneth Bailey, who is he's passed away. He was a commentator that really focused on the Middle Eastern aspects of Jesus' writings and even Paul's writings as well. He sees a partial connection here between verses 20 and 21 of chapter 28 and the prodigal son story. So note, the prodigal son was also kept on the journey, given food to eat, given garments to wear, and he returned to his father's house in safety. So let's check this out and note the things that I have highlighted in gold there. So he set out and came to his father. When he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him. He ran, embraced the son, and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and in your sight I am no longer worthy of being called your son. But the father said to his slaves, "Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him." There's the clothing. "Put a ring on his finger and the sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and slaughter it. Let's eat." He was given food to eat and celebrate. "For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He has been lost and he was found." So he was definitely kept on the journey and returned to his father's house. So a interesting parallel there. In fact, Bailey really he has an entire book that I'm reading all about the Jacob's life and how it parallels the prodigal son. So we'll be picking up more of this as we move through the story of Jacob. So given that we've got two walking in his dust, rabbi, walking in the dust of the rabbi applications here. So the first one is that we are Bethel, right? He calls this stone, surely this is the house of God. 1 Corinthians 3:16, "Do you not know that you are a temple of God and that the Spirit dwells in you?" And remember what Jacob said, how awesome is this place? And so let us have that same sense of awe, of awesomeness, both in the terms of kind of a fear, a healthy fear, but also like a Californian that I am, awesome. It's just totally awesome that we aren't just in the house of God, we are the house of God in that respect. Psalm 139, "I give thanks to you because I am awesomely and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well." Our second is an inference that's actually made by the Jewish sages regarding the reason for Jacob's vow. And this is fascinating. The sages explain that because Jacob knew his time with Laban would not be easy, his request was that God might keep him from speaking evil. We've talked about this in our gospel study with the leprosy and Lashon Hara, which is the evil speech or evil tongue. So the sages write, Jacob was on his way to Laban's house and feared that he would be detrimentally influenced by him, hence his request to be saved from speaking evil. So all of us, we have to pray the same thing. Pray that God will save us from an evil speech, from gossip, from backstabbing, backbiting, spreading untruths, or even truths that are designed to hurt people. We all have people like Laban in our lives, and we all need this protection. So not only that, but we need to pray in advance that God protects us and preserves us through the eventual trials that we will face. Because otherwise, if you're outfitting your armor while the battle is going on, it's too late. Now is the time to pray up and pray that we don't blow our witness by misusing our tongues for whatever situation we are going to be facing. So those are our two thoughts of a discipleship application. In our next lesson, we'll begin the often humorous story of Jacob with Laban in this Padan Aram, or the city of Haran. So we're going to see Jacob's first 4 sons will be born to him, and this whole ruse between Leah and Rachel, and kind of what happens to Jacob here as he himself gets deceived. So we'll see you then for Genesis chapter 29.